Thank you, Sandish. You know, at National Geographic, a key part of our work is engaging and elevating young people so we can prepare them to follow in the footsteps of those extraordinary explorers you heard today. And Jonathan and I are very excited to have a conversation on this stage and to introduce you to some amazing young people in a little bit. You know, we want young people to love learning, to seek knowledge, to be informed decision makers so they can create lasting solutions to the global challenges we face. And like our explorers, other educators, scientists, and storytellers who often travel far and wide in the name of their craft, we know that inspiring curiosity and wonder happens both inside and outside the classroom. So Jonathan, I know that growing up in Canada, nature was a big influence on your life. And I'm wondering if you could just talk about a moment when your interest in the natural world got sparked.
Yeah, growing up in Canada, we'd go up north and we would spend weeks at a time canoeing, and you wouldn't see another person. And just the vastness of the landscape creates a sense of awe, a sense of respect for the natural world. So it was always in my bones. And then, of course, I had a mother who was writing natural history books. And I had a father who was an avid bird watcher, so that was really encouraging me. But when I think about that one moment, I would say it was when I met Jane Goodall. I was about 12, and the National Geographic magazine came under the door, and I picked it up, and I looked through it, and I saw that you could study chimpanzees. And I was a terrible reader, but I read that, you know, from cover to cover to cover. I walked around with it, and the neighbors thought this was a bit, you know, strange behavior. So when they heard that Diane Fossey and Jane Goodall and Barut Gildekas were coming to town, they bought tickets for my mom and I to go and see them. So we went, and I was so excited, and I sat there. And I looked out, and I was on the edge of my seat, and I was just absorbing every second. My mind was just flying all over the place, just thinking about the possibility. And then there was a standing ovation at the end, of course, with those three individuals. My mom looked down, and I was gone. I was missing. And it was New York, and she was a bit nervous. And then she looked up, and way down, you know, up on the stage, there was this 12-year-old climbing up onto the stage. And there I was. I went up and I gave her my $2 allowance. And that was my first real contribution to conservation. But,
pretty good contribution.
Yeah. But that was the moment I just realized, you know, then I went on to study gorillas in Gabon and as a career in science. But that was such an influential moment. What about you, Vicki?
Well, you know, we grew up very differently. I grew up on a small farm in rural Kentucky where we raised everything we ate and had an outhouse in the back. But I grew up with this deep-seated sense of community and what it's like to live in a rural area where you fend for yourself and you take care of your neighbor. And whenever I had a free moment as a child, I would read. I mean, books took me everywhere, and I experienced things like the wildebeest migration of the Serengeti or the building of the Great Wall of China, and I went on those, you know, world-changing sea voyages with explorer James Cook, and I learned about all those faraway places and other people's experiences through the books I read. But I often wonder what would happen if my imagination had been fueled differently, if I could have seen those things, and what would happen if we at National Geographic were able to help those things leap off the page for young people.
And I think that's really what we do. We have our amazing explorers. And just a few weeks ago, I was watching Dominique, one of our fellows, and she's in Gorongosa in Mozambique, and she was speaking to classrooms around the world. And she was talking about what it was like to be an elephant biologist and the importance of protected areas. And I watched the students listening, and I was wondering, you know, how many of those students are going to end up being scientists? How many might go on to be study elephants? But that's one of hundreds of explorers, and each one is like a novel that has a story that we're really committed to getting into every classroom and opening the minds of children all around. So I'm just looking so forward to working with you to make that happen, to bring the science, the exploration, merged with the education to open the minds of children all over the world.
Yeah, and being able to bring that integration of science and exploration and education, together. Those disciplines are so powerful, and I, for one, am so grateful to be joining forces with Jonathan and the SciEx team here to be able to do that, because learning about the world and how it works starts with that spirit of exploration. Can't expect young people to generate solutions without thinking like an explorer, and that's really the basis for our learning framework here, right? A framework that really focuses on curiosity and creativity and problem solving and critical thinking. So would you describe a little bit more, Jonathan, about your experience about how we do that here?
Well, I think the first thing is that that inspiration, the making it known to the next generation that these things are possible. But for me, the really important and essential next step is the doing. And I see classrooms that you're working with sign up for GeoChallenge, for example. And in a GeoChallenge, you'll make a commitment to dealing with a challenge like plastics. And you watch this classroom come together and identify solutions and then start applying it in their community and starting with their parents, but then going out to local government and local business. And then they taste success. They see that they can actually have an impact. And to me, that's when I get really inspired, because I see that these are going to be planetary stewards for the rest of their lives.
They are. And learning becomes so much more relevant for young people when they are connected with real world experts. Seeing themselves in somebody else helps them cultivate curiosity and helps put them on a critical path that they might not even considered before. And, lifting up these young people lifts up all of us. And we see this happen over and over again at National Geographic. One teacher told us, my students used to want to be rock stars, now they want to be scientists.
Yeah.
And that's just one of the numerous examples of what happens when National Geographic's mission comes to life. One bold individual with transformative ideas passing the torch to inspire tomorrow's explorers.
And I completely agree. We have to make being a scientist or a planetary steward much cooler than being a rock star. But imagine if you could be both. It'd be pretty good. But
That would be awesome.
With the next generation, I see a sea change, really. I see these young leaders emerging all over the world, and this is the generation that our inaction has really put them in a difficult situation. And I don't get the sense that they're going to leave the next generation in that same position. These are the ones that are going to be securing our biosphere. So when I think about the history books of the future, I think they'll be looking back at these individuals rather than our rock stars.
I think they will be too. And it's in that spirit that we're thrilled to have with us today 3 inspiring young people who are driving change in their communities across the globe. And we're so glad you stayed around with us for this segment. And Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me on the stage for a moment, because I think it's so important for people to see the way that we are arm in arm joining forces both around National Geographic's work with explorers, but also with this next generation.
Thank you, Vicki.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet.